So the Rush meta has been in a pretty good place overall, I want to say, but it is starting to get a little bit stale. Now, obviously, your opinion might differ depending on which decks you like playing, how many games you've been jamming, maybe how many tournaments you've entered, but overall, I would still say the meta is in a pretty good place. There isn't one deck that's completely dominating, but there is a deck that is warping the meta around itself in a sense. That deck is 7's Wonder Fusion Turbo. So 7's Wonder Fusion is not really the problem card here. It's a very, very powerful card. It's extremely good. The main problem is 7's Geas. 7's Geas is such an oppressive force because you almost feel like you have to be playing around it. If ever I'm entering a tournament, I've always got to be thinking about how my deck handles 7's Geas. During any game I'm playing, a lot of the time I have to be sat there thinking, alright, but can this board beat 7's Geas? Does this board just lose to 7's Geas? Because a lot of the time, you'll set up your turn 1 board, let's say you summon out, I don't know, 2500 attacker, level 7 in attack mode, and then your opponent drops a 7's Geas on you, goes up to like 5000 attack, can attack twice, and if you didn't have a back row that saves you, you're just out. Or if your opponent drops a Jinzo, or if they drop Heavy Storm, you can just lose. Because again, 7's Wonder Fusion Turbo just fuels the graveyard as hard as possible. If your opponent just gets lucky enough to hit both the Dragius and the 7's Rogue Magician, and is also lucky enough to have 7's Wonder Fusion, which it happens quite a lot, you can just get blown out on the first turn. So I think the problems that 7's Geas have affect both before you play a game, in deck building, and during the game, where your decision making in the game can drastically shift depending on whether or not you're playing around 7's Geas or not. So the first big thing about 7's Geas, I guess, is that it is level 10. That is the same level as a maximum, which means it is immune to a lot of the same stuff that maximums are unaffected by. Just by being level 10, a lot of cards will say level 9 or lower, level 8 or lower. All of those cards will just not affect 7's Geas, which is annoying to play against, needless to say. Having a wide variety of the card pool, especially I guess in this case trap cards, not affect your big boss monster is really, really, good for that boss monster, but really, really frustrating when you're trying to be like, well, this card would be pretty good, but it doesn't beat 7's Geas, so maybe I shouldn't include it. So you need to be looking for trap cards that can either stop 7's Geas from hitting the board, deal with it once it has hit the board, or make it so 7's Geas doesn't just kill you. And some of those things are a little bit problematic because they all lose to something like Jinzo, they all lose to something like Heavy Storm, because even if you had something like a Word Working to stop your opponent from having the material to actually summon 7's Geas, your opponent could start their turn by activating Heavy Storm, and you can't react to the Heavy Storm until its effect is finished resolving, which means your Word Working is no longer on the field, so you can't use it. So there will be some situations where Word Working will just shut down 7's Wonder Fusion, but there are also times where it won't. I've been in many a situation where I've used Word Working, emptied my opponent's graveyard, and then they've just managed to, tribute 2 monsters, summon out a Dragius, use Dragius effect, mills the 7's Road, then activates 7's Wonder Fusion and gets the combo off anyway. So Word Working, although a good tool to help kind of stop 7's Geas a lot of the time, does not work all of the time. It's a good thing that Word Working also affects most decks in the meta at the moment, so it's not just a completely dead card, which means we have seen a lot of people maining it, but it is not... You can't just say, oh, just use Word Working, that will always stop 7's Geas, because that is just not the case. So the next issue that 7's Geas has is it can only use this effect if your opponent has a level 7 or higher monster on their field. This means you can play around 7's Geas by not having level 7 and higher monsters face up on your field, which means that decks that don't use level 7 and higher monsters, so let's think XQT, let's think Harpies, and to a lesser extent Cyber Dragons, can play around it in a way. But for decks that do rely on 7+ monsters, you've now got a bit of an awkward situation before you. You could set your big boss monsters, in which case they're not doing what they should be doing, but if you leave them face up and effectively have them do what you want them to do, so let's say you've got Mirror Innovator, you want to be using its effect to pierce or clear the board or shuffle some cards back. Let's say you're playing Light Galaxy and you want to maybe summon out some of your fusion monsters, maybe you want to just end on Oblivion and just have it attack. 7's Geas will punish you for doing so. By trying to play around 7's Geas, you're effectively tying one hand behind your back and not letting your deck do what it really wants to do. Basically, this could create kind of one of 2 scenarios. Either you play defensively and the game turns into a bit of a stall fest, nobody's really having fun, your opponent is probably sat there like, well, I don't need 7's Geas to kill you, I can just go into Chariot. But because you'll always be sat there like, well, now I could maybe deal with this chariot, but then if I don't just kill my opponent in this one turn, on the crackback he could just 7's Geas me, so now I'm also in this weird situation again. Or you just don't play defensively, just play your deck how it wants to play, just play aggro, and then just hope your opponent doesn't just draw 7's Wonder Fusion, get full combo, 7's Geas you out the game. And this is what I mean when I say it almost warps the game around itself, and the meta is, I think, reflecting that in a lot of ways. So as a 7's Wonder Fusion player, the game often feels very, very exciting for you. You get to mill a load of stuff into your graveyard then can act as a toolbox. You can then, do your big combo, 7's Wonder Fusion, go into your 7's Geas, beat your opponent up, but also you've got Paladin you can fall back on, you've got Chariot you can fall back on, so your deck feels very versatile, you feel like you have a lot of options, and you always feel like you are never in an unwinnable position, and that is a very cool thing about that deck, even if unfortunately it does come at the detriment of everyone else having a lot of fun a lot of the time. But the mirror for 7's Wonder Fusion suffers the same problems. That being that either you respect your opponent might 7's Geas you out of nowhere, and thus you put a load of monsters in defense, wait for your opponent to leave something in attack mode, and then try and counter them. So for example, if you don't summon your Dragius or your 7's Red Magician in attack mode, you just keep setting them, your opponent will probably end up summoning Chariot or something, trying to pop your guys out the way, at which point if you've got everything set up, you can just drop your 7's Wonder Fusion, go into 7's Geas, and just OTK them. But you might not draw the combo, so by trying to respect your opponent's 7's Geas and playing around it and thus not playing aggressively, if your opponent just decides, screw it, I'm going to play aggressively, they can just kill you out of nowhere just with Dragius Beatdown or Chariot or just 7's Red Magician. So it puts you in a very strange situation, where if you want to respect your opponent's OTK, you might lose to them not OTKing you, but if you don't respect the OTK, you can just get OTK'd. So it feels like there isn't really a correct decision. Either you will go aggressive, you won't get punished and you'll win, or you'll go aggressive, get punished and lose, or you'll play defensive, get punished and lose, or play defensive, draw into your combo and win. There isn't a one strategy beats all, and I guess that is an interesting thing, but it means that whenever you're playing 7's Wonder Fusion, a lot of the time you kind of toss a coin. You're like, well, either I play aggro and I win or I lose, or I play defensive and I win or I lose. There isn't a correct option a lot of the time, at least in my opinion. That is the experience I've had. I've been playing tournament matches in the mirror and lost both of them, one of which I went too aggressive and thus got punished, and one of which I went too defensive and got punished because I just didn't draw the full combo. So it's a very awkward situation, and I don't think the mirror is a good reflection of skill, and it is more, well, did you draw the out, and did you get punished for playing the way that you played, which feels kind of bad. Not to mention, if both players respect their opponent's 7's Geas and don't want to get OTK'd out of the game, both players will just be playing defense forever, which is also really boring. If neither player want to commit the level 7 and higher monsters face up to the field, then the game just becomes set pass the game, which is also really boring. So looking at the three decks that have been topping the most consistently over in Japan, we are seeing 7's Wonder Fusion, Cyber Dragons, and Harpies. And I don't think this is a coincidence that Cyber Dragons and Harpies have an okay matchup into the 7's Wonder Fusion Turbo. Cyber Dragons and Harpies both have trap cards that can affect 7's Geas and stop it from killing you, as well as both decks not having to rely on level 7 and higher monsters to win games. Now, a lot of the time you'll look at Cyber Dragons and be like, well, yeah, but you have to summon a Cyber Twin or a Cyber End or a Cyber Rush, and these are all high level monsters. And that is true, but a lot of the time when you summon those monsters, you're going to try and win that turn, so it doesn't matter. Or you could be playing something like Dragon Lion Pit Trap, which can get rid of your high level monster to deal with one of your opponent's threats. Therefore, you don't have a level 7 or higher monster on your field, so 7's Geas can't resolve its effect. How do we fix this problem? So it's tricky, because a lot of people will probably say, oh, limit 7's Wonder Fusion, because then it'll be less consistent. But I think if you get rid of 7's Geas completely and just ban it, 7's Wonder Fusion Turbo is still a very, very powerful deck. Almost certainly still a tier 1 deck. But it no longer has that oppressive nature where you feel like you have to deck build entirely around it. You have to choose a deck entirely around it. You have to play the game in a very passive manner, or just throw caution to the wind, just YOLO and hope your opponent doesn't have combo. I think As is, Sevens Geas is the problem card, and if that card goes away, I think the meta just becomes a lot healthier without having to kill any of these decks. Now, the problem with that is we have no banned cards, as of yet, in Rush. So this would be the very first ban. But I don't think this is inherently a problem. I think we're always going to have bans eventually, but at the same time, it is a big anime card. The final duel between Yuga and Otis in Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s was Yuga summoning the Sevens Geas, and that was kind of the good send-off to Sevens, so I can understand them not wanting to hit such an iconic card. But I don't think anime nostalgia goggles should be enough to basically prevent a card from going on the ban list. I think the worst thing they could do is actually limit Sevens Wonder Fusion, because then it will just turn into, well, you can still play the deck, but now it's going to feel even sackier when you lose to it, because your opponent just draws the one of, which just always feels even worse. I think the main takeaway here is that a lot of Rush players, myself included, are getting a bit bored of having to build around Sevens Wonder Fusion, or I suppose more specifically, Sevens Geas. Always having to include a lot of cards in the main deck that can out it, and then having a large portion of your side deck also built to try and out it, and then sometimes you just won't draw those cards or your opponent can play around it. There is no way to 100% guarantee Sevens Geas will not hit the board. You could have 3 amazing trap cards that could try and interrupt it, but if your opponent tribute summons Jinzo, it doesn't matter. If your opponent drops a Heavy Storm, it doesn't matter what your trap cards are. If your opponent has a Floodgate like Barrier Statue or Vanity's Fiend, again, those cards can be popped. If your opponent wants to run something like Zaborg or Estrom, the level 5 one that can pop a monster, they can get rid of the Barrier Statues. Mad Rare Aquila is a card that we've been seeing a ton of play. That just immediately outs Vanity's Fiend. So there are ways to just get rid of all of these cards. Now you might be sat there thinking, well, your opponent has to draw all of these cards. And, you know, you're not wrong. But if your opponent's playing 1 copy of Jinzo, 1 copy of Heavy Storm, that means they only need to draw, you know, a 2 of in their deck, effectively, because they're effectively having the same result. Then a card that gets rid of a monster, your opponent could just be running like a 2 of again, just have 2 Estrom. And now, when you think about it like that, your opponent just needs the graveyard to be set up, which the rest of the deck is facilitating, because generally the deck is just mill turbo. Then you just have to draw Sevens Wonder Fusion, a Jinzo or a Heavy Storm, and then like an Estrom, and then nothing can stop you. You now have a 3-card combo that just wins the game. And again, nothing stops it. It is just, the game is over, which is a little bit silly in my opinion. And again, this is coming from someone who really enjoys playing Sevens Wonder Fusion. I love that card. I think winning games with Sevens Geas is really fun when you're the one doing it. Not so fun for your opponent, unfortunately, when they feel like, well, I did nothing wrong, but I'm dead because my opponent summoned a 6,000 to 10,000 attack, sometimes piercing, double attacking boss monster. It's like, well, I guess I lose then. As for the other decks that are doing very well in the meta, Harpies have the most wins at the moment, looking like a very strong deck, very fun to play. Again, has a pretty good matchup into Sevens Geas, has pretty good matchups into most decks. The only real, I guess, Harpies have the 2 weaknesses, right? They have the fact that they basically can't play very well under Prison, and basically just says, oh, you can't tribute summon your monsters, which means a lot of the time you'll just brick on them, you can't really do much. And they have the problem where their attack points generally are quite low. So if you don't have all of the means to boost their attack over your opponent's monsters, again, you can kind of just fall by the wayside. But other than that, fantastic deck. Seems very consistent. It's been, again, winning the most, so fantastic. And overall, quite happy where Harpies are at the moment. The only reason I personally don't like taking into tournaments is because the idea of getting blown out by Prison and just my opponent just like dropping this floodgate that stops me from playing the game is just really off-putting. But other than that, really enjoying Harpies. And the other big deck is Cyber Dragons. Cyber Dragons, again, in a lot of ways, very similar to Sevens Geas. The idea, a lot of the time, is going to be to summon a giant Cyber Twin, either with Power Bond or just, you know, naturally go into a fusion, blast your opponent for a crap ton of damage, try and kill them in 1 turn if you can, but again, Cyber Dragon doesn't have to do that. It's a mid-range deck that can blow your opponent out, which I think is a good place to be in, and Mirror Innovator will always just be a fantastic boss monster. Also, machines get access to a lot of the best traps in the game. Because they're playing a lot of level 5s or higher in the, well, you're going to have the Mirror Innovators, you're going to have the Cyber Dragons, you're going to have the Cyber Processors, and oftentimes you'll include maybe a couple of others. And those are all really great targets for Antlion Pit Trap, which again, doesn't stop Sevens Geas itself, but if your opponent was to, let's say, summon a Sevens Geas and then summon something else, that would technically out it. So if your opponent, for example, goes 7's Geas and then summons Pitch Black Warwolf to try and turn off your back row, you can activate it in response and then get rid of the 7's Geas, so it can be useful in that. Also, they get access to Battle Demotion, which, again, if your opponent doesn't have the full combo, if they don't have the Jinzo, they don't have a Warwolf, they don't have a Mirage Dragon, they don't have a Heavy Storm, and they don't just get lucky and blow up your back row with like Ghost Cyclones and whatever, then Battle Demotion can swap 7's Geas to Defense Mode, which is one of the better ways we have to try and deal with it. So the other thing is, a lot of the other decks that are quite strong, I feel like are kept down in tier 2, maybe because of their own kind of fundamental weaknesses, but also because they don't play well around 7's Geas. Again, they have an over-reliance on level 7 higher monsters, things like Light Galaxy, things like Dark Galaxy. A lot of the tier 2 decks are still very strong, very fun. They can definitely take games off of the tier 1 decks, but they lose to 7's Geas kind of hard, so that's why a lot of people opt to either not take them or they're not showing as good results because, again, they just get blown out by 7's Geas. So what is another alternative we could come up with? Well, we could just release a lot of cards that counter 7's Geas. Now this is a bit tricky because that now means that you have to make room in your deck for cards that counter 7's Geas, but Mad Rare Aquila did seem to almost kill Executee, so it does show that if you do include cards that are powerful enough and useful enough generically, then that can kill some decks. So we do see something come out that is a hard counter to 7's Geas. Maybe we could do something with that, but it'd be a bit tricky, and then you still have to draw into it, so it could just become, oh, did you draw into your 1 copy or 1 of 3 copies that out 7's Geas? Oh no, you didn't. Well, you lose the game anyway. But looking forward to the new set, which is Phoenix of the Roaring Flame, it's looking amazing. It looks like one of the best sets we're going to have in a long time, and I really hope that the level of fun in that set really extends to them being tournament viable. So I've already done a lot of testing with things like Gaia, with the Secret Investigators, and with the Phoenix Maximum, and all of those cards are so much fun. I really hope that we start seeing tournament results when the set comes out with a lot of these decks in it, and it's not just, again, 7's Geas Turbo just winning everything with Harpy and Cyber Dragon sat next to them because, again, they have okay matchups into it. So the other big support, I suppose, is for Jointech. We're getting new Jointech Maximum, we're getting new Jointech Fusion, so new Jointech Boss Monsters, we get a ton of Jointech cards. Although I haven't had much success with them yet. Again, Phoenix Maximum, fantastic, loving it. Found a build that I really like, jamming it, it's great. Gaia, love it, fantastic, really, really fun, really enjoying it. Secret Investigators, again, loving it. Had maybe a few little problems with it, but still overall, great, really enjoying it, really fun design. Then I got to the Jointechs and I was like, I love machines, I love all the Jointech stuff that's come in the past, even though it hasn't been super, super strong. And I'm not gelling with the new Jointech stuff yet, unfortunately. If anyone has any really interesting Jointech lists, feel free to chuck them in the comments and I'll have a look and try them out. Because again, I'm just really struggling with the Jointechs. I've been trying out primarily kind of the mill turbo slash get the fusion on, bring Scorpio, bring back Centipede, fuse them together. The boss monster seems pretty good. I don't know if the boss monster is worth the investment that it requires, and having to have fusion in the graveyard to use Scorpion's effect to bring back Centipede is a bit sucky, but other than that, it's been okay. I've also tried a high-level turbo build where we use automatic accident prevention to swarm the board with giant guys, and then we can fall back on the maximum and then send back, or force our opponent to try and send back 3 level 7s to give it maximum attack boost. It works every now and then, like one in every 4 games I get to play the game, but it's a bit bricky, so yeah. Also, the new set has a bunch of additional support for a variety of other strategies, including Sea Serpents. We've seen 1 new dinosaur card, but it's not a very good one. We're hoping for some more still. We've got some more insect stuff in there, so hopefully we can see a few more decks kind of get some life breathed into them that desperately need it. And then there's the one really bonkers standalone card in Legend Strike, which, fantastic card. That card is just so good. I'm wondering if that card might also warp the meta around a little bit, because it can be... Every deck wants to mill, which means Legend Magician is always going to be useful. Legend Strike can effectively just be a body. We can bring back any of our level 4s, which means we could bring back Mirage Dragon, Warwolf. We could bring back the Legend Magician itself to pop a spell trap. We can bring back Barrier Statue. We can bring back Aquila. There's so many good cards we can bring back that are level 4. And it could, in some cases, just take the place of spell trap hate in our decks. So we'll have to see how that one actually works out. So far, I've been having a ton of success with this card. And then the new Legend card, Negate Attack. So I said months ago that we need a replacement for Magic Cylinder if we want to ban it, because a lot of archetypes started getting trap destruction prevention. Things like Cyber Griffin, which lets you discard a card from your hand and then make one of your level 5 or higher machine monsters unable to be destroyed. That meant that something like Mirror Force couldn't blow you out. But so because we didn't want to be running Mirror Force, because a lot of things had a lot of trap destruction prevention, people swapped onto Magic Cylinder. And then when the deck started getting like Sevens Geas, who can boost up to over 8,000 attack, it made sense to use Magic Cylinder to counter those decks and blast your opponent for a ton of damage. Things like Eternal Galactic Oblivion, things like a power bonded Cyber Dragon monster, and things like Sevens Geas all hard lose to something like Magic Cylinder, which punishes you for boosting your attack by a crap ton. Unfortunately, Magic Cylinder, much like Sevens Geas, has become a bit of a hated card in the community in a lot of ways. And I said, again, months ago, that if we were going to get rid of Magic Cylinder, we needed a decent replacement that can stop an attack, something like Negate Attack. Now, Negate Attack is not the same as Magic Cylinder. Negate Attack stops all battles for the turn, which is very different, but it is still a trap card that stops your opponent attacking, but doesn't destroy anything and doesn't burn your opponent. So I think we probably won't see a Cylinder ban immediately, but now I think we have a legitimate reason to ban it. We have a good replacement that fulfills what Cylinder was doing without having the annoying part of the effect, which is just, oh, your opponent's just got blown out. At the same time, we don't really want to dissuade people from playing like Eternal Galactic Oblivion or dissuade people from playing Cyber Dragons. Those decks are still fun. They're not crazy oppressive. They're very enjoyable to play against a lot of the time, I feel. They're very enjoyable to play. So I wouldn't like to see those decks get punished more. So I think just get rid of Magic Cylinder and have Negate Attack be its alternative, I think is a pretty good way to go. So I personally, I guess I would like to see Sevens Geas and Magic Cylinder banned. And I think that is a sentiment that most of the Rush community can probably get behind. Obviously, there's going to be some people that love Magic Cylinder. There's going to be a lot of people that really like Sevens Geas. And again, I really like Sevens Geas. I like playing it. But I think it's healthier for the game overall to see both those cards go. So yeah, that was a little discussion about the meta. Now, primarily, you'll probably notice this is just hating on Sevens Geas. Again, I really like playing Sevens Geas. I think it's a really cool boss monster, but I think for the health of the game overall, I'd still like to see it go. I think the meta, other than that, is in a pretty good place. I think, again, to fix the meta, which I'm not even sure if it really needs fixing, to make the meta more enjoyable for myself, and I believe for a lot of other people, I think just hitting the problematic cards, and that primarily being Sevens Geas and Magic Cylinder, is the way to go. So, thanks for watching the video, and I'll have more like this coming soon.